even aware of which way the fire is going. They have so many fires, they can't really keep track. Copy, we need a unit to head to...
Sheriff's Office! That's the sound that woke me up at 2:30 in the morning, October 9th, 2017. I quickly turned to my wife, Sharon. I said, "We're evacuating now." She ran downstairs, woke up my 16-year-old son. We grabbed what we could, and 3 minutes, we were out the door. We evacuated to my mother's house in the town to the southwest, about half an hour away. As we sat there, watching the news, consuming it hour after hour, text started to come in. We couldn't tell truth from fiction. We were checking on our family, checking on our friends, checking on our colleagues. We didn't know what was there, what wasn't. There was a lot of confusion, frustration. At that time, I made the decision, we're going to try to get back home. The next day, we got in the car. We knew that there were blockades, police checkpoints at various locations around the town. Since we're local and the police force that were there at the time weren't, we were able to find our way into our neighborhood. At the time, you're thinking, maybe we're the one. Maybe we're the one house that still stands. As we turned the corner, this is what we saw. I live in a small neighborhood, 49 homes, all completely leveled. Behind us was some townhouses and a shopping center, gone. There were multiple neighborhoods on our way in that was impacted the same. That began a very personal journey for my family and myself. I would soon find out it would also begin a professional journey. As we morphed, we understood that there was an impact to our company. So my name is Jason Wisler. I'm a technology order fulfillment supply chain manager. I work out of the Santa Rosa office in California. I'm honored to be here to tell our story. I have my colleagues Ethan Hunt, also from the Santa Rosa site, and Hock from our Penang, Malaysia site. Who is Keysight Technologies? We're the world's leading electronic measurement company. Our origins are from Hewlett-Packard, the original products made by Hewlett-Packard. In 1999, Hewlett-Packard spun off test and measurement, became Agilent Technologies, and in 2014, Keysight was spun off as our own independent pure-play measurement company. At the time, we moved our corporate offices to Santa Rosa, California. We moved into a gorgeous 200-acre campus, and that campus houses 2,000 employees, contractors, as well as corporate offices, our laboratories, R&D, manufacturing, and important to me, our technology centers. We have 4 primary technology centers. We provide the componentry that is the heart of our products, as I like to say. Okay. When we talk about disaster recovery planning, business continuity planning, our first thought was always earthquakes. We're in North Bay area. Santa Rosa lies on top of a major earthquake fault, Rogers Creek Fault. So as we tell you about our journey, I'll cover the prepare phase, and I'll bring up my colleagues to cover the respond and recover phase. I have a small team of supply chain professionals in the Santa Rosa office. We do our day-to-day planning, procurement, NPI planning, supply chain analysis, but we're also chartered with business continuity planning for the technology centers. Part of that is part of a bigger program, our focus. First, we mitigate. Keysight has a global multi-source supply base. We have active, robust supplier management practices. We also do annual risk assessment monitoring. Secondly, we do facilities and operational security. For where we live, earthquake country, that implies earthquake bracing. We understand what that means, what the impact potentially could be if an earthquake hit. We have on-site response teams, both chemical medical, infrastructure. Annually, we do a management simulation where we simulate a disaster occurring on site. We bring in local first responders and walk through drills. And during the protection phase, this is where my team plays. These are core sole source technologies, only built here, only fabricated here technologies. As a supply chain manager, that makes me nervous, right? We like multiple sources. We like to de-risk the supply chain. But that's the world I live in. So my team, along with the help of Ethan Hunt and his team, have produced a model to help us manage this. It's a two-pronged model. First, we identify what are our core technologies. We utilize tools such as Kinaxis RapidResponse to help us with our vertical pegging through our supply chain, in some cases up to 20 levels deep in that supply chain. We then measure at the product level what the contribution is to our financials. That includes both life cycle of the end products as well as their gross margin and revenue contribution. We can categorize that into a matrix. On the risk profile, for each of our operations, we understand what the risk profile is. We call them levers, what levers we have in case something does occur. And then we run through recovery scenarios. How long would it take to get operations back up? Key question we always ask is, what happens if you could not get in the building for 6 months? What would you do? That feeds into our production strategy and our execution plans. But before we get to there, applying a new word from Tricia Wong, we apply the thick data. Our teams bring in the data or the information that isn't in our systems yet and apply that to better improve the output of our model. Plans are good. Simulations help. But we use RapidResponse as a key enabler around this whole infrastructure. Pegging, contribution analysis, and most importantly, monitoring the health of our business continuity plans. So as I said, plans are great, simulations help, execution is important, but as Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. On October 9th, 2017, we got hit in the mouth. We were impacted by the most destructive wildfire in California history. 22 people lost their lives in that wildfire, 5,600 structures. On Keysight headquarters, 2 buildings were knocked down. Those were the buildings that housed my team. A school, we had an on-site school, was also completely wiped out. Every building on site was damaged either by smoke, fire, slight fire damage, or water. So, we had an impossible mission. What are we going to do? Who are we going to call? With an impossible mission, we call up Ethan Hunt. I'd like to introduce Ethan. He will tell us how we responded to this devastating crisis.
Thank you, Jason. During that first week of the fires, Keysight really took a people-first approach in our response to what was happening. On day one, management from sites all around the world jumped into action very quickly. Fortunately, my family wasn't evacuated, but I drove them out of town anyway to get out of the smoke and some of the danger. And I remember sitting at my friend's kitchen table, and I started receiving messages through my laptop and also on my phone from management who sat in Colorado Springs. And basically, they were trying to check in with all of us and ask us to check in with every single one of our employees to verify their health and safety. This was an effort that would be participated in all levels of management with our HR department support. While we were contacting employees, Keysight was very quick to try to set up an employee resource center in Santa Rosa. We support a local makerspace, and we were able to use that facility to provide cash and supplies and even mental health support to the more than 500 people who had lost their homes or been displaced by the fires through evacuation. During the entire time the site was compromised, not a single job was lost, and in fact, we added a few to aid in the recovery. Also on that first day, pretty early in the morning, our vice president of technology order fulfillment was one of the first people on site. So he was greeted by fire still burning all around the landscape, fallen telephone poles, roofs on fire, and they quickly mobilized a site incident command team. This allowed them to really stabilize the site, secure the entries and exits, and work with the local responders to understand where was safe and where wasn't safe. On day 2, we were able to put together a supply chain leadership response team. This really set the basis for weeks of daily meetings in which we would check in with other managers, first about employee safety and trying to ensure that people were getting what they needed for support. But also, we then started talking about trying to ramp production back up. We also started receiving messages from our CEO, again, re-emphasizing, please focus on your families. If you need help, come and get it. He even offered up rooms in his own home for people that still didn't have a place to stay. On day 3, we really started turning our attention towards suppliers and customers. One of the first business escalations that Jason's team received was a supplier that we needed to get going on a PO to get them some materials. The project manager for that project contacted Jason's team. All 3 of the people that he escalated to had lost their homes. Fortunately, we were able to move that work over to our partners in Penang, Malaysia, and they were able to go ahead and cut that check. By this point, we had really established a command center type of approach. The site was starting to stabilize, we started to understand what the damage was, and we had the employee resource center. It was from a back room inside this resource center that members of my team, Jason's team, and others started pulling backlog reports and PO reports out of RapidResponse. This helped us understand where our supplies were and what shipments were at risk for our end customers. We actually started contacting suppliers and asking them to build and hold materials for us. Thankfully, we have a very supportive supply base, and they understood what was going on, and they helped us with that. In addition, we had supplies that were on their way to the site. As Jason mentioned, it's not just our headquarters, but it's a technology center. This means we're bringing in the rawest of raw materials, precious metals, things that need to be refrigerated in special ways. We needed to divert those supplies to a different site. Well, you can imagine if you don't have part numbers set up in Oracle for these things, this is just one series of problems that you have to start solving through. Fortunately, we were able to work with our Colorado Springs partners and make a lot of this happen. Ultimately, we'd get those supplies back to Santa Rosa. On day 4, the initial building assessments were basically complete. Working with the local fire departments and police, we were able to understand what buildings were safe to go into and not to go into. Security perimeters were set up, and there was a very safety cautious check-in program that they set up at the top of the site. So anyone coming and going was briefed on what they could and couldn't do and where they could and couldn't go. We weren't allowed to go into any of the buildings without having somebody with us and a radio on hand so that we could contact the workplace services teams. By day 5 and 6, we could start thinking again about actually getting production back up and running. So we put together what we called find and fix teams. And these were the teams that would actually go into the production lines, identify equipment that needed to be cleaned and decontaminated. We actually put up visqueen plastic walls to separate the production areas from the desk environments. This allowed us to scrub the air in the production areas and start to clean and recalibrate our equipment so we could have production back up and running. In addition, it was time to start thinking about longer lead time materials we would need when production would actually be back up and running. So one of the best things that happened that week was in one of the letters from our CEO, he sent this picture, and it was the first time the lights had been turned on. That's our Building 1 lobby, and it was a sign of hope, for everybody that was receiving it. What you can't see is just to the left of that, there was a window that had blown out from the heat damage of the fire. At this time, fires are still burning all around the county. People's homes are still very much in danger. But we continued to try to do what we could to support people and work on the business. By the end of the week, the fire department had finally cleared us to be able to go into the buildings. And so we thought we could go in and retrieve some finished goods materials that we could move to a different site and then actually clean and ship to our end customers. We were still thinking about our customers at this point. So management had this crazy plan where they were going to hook me to a bunch of cables, and I was going to descend from the ceiling. No, I'm just kidding. So what really happened was a number of us managers actually had to meet at the bottom of the hill that Keysight is located on. And I remember our cars lined up next to this dive bar that's at the bottom of this hill, and a Humvee with National Guard people in it. And we had to wait for our vice president to talk to them and get the okay for us to drive our 6 or 7 cars up the hill. Once we were there, we checked in with the site incident command team. They briefed us on how crazy everything was and how we had to be very careful. The air was still thick with smoke. The ground was completely covered with ash. Trees were burned. We had to put on N95 rated masks to ensure that we kept smoke damage out of our lungs. Hard hats. They asked us to wear steel-toed boots, goggles, and we were actually able to go into the warehouse. Now, this is an area of the warehouse I don't spend a lot of time in. So I've got a flashlight and a paper pick list, and I'm trying to find, manuals and things like that need to be picked and put in with these products that we would ship out to our customers. Ultimately, the effort was successful. We were able to pack up the trucks, and all of that equipment went to our Roseville site near Sacramento, California. At that point, they were able to clean and decontaminate those boxes, recalibrate them, and ensure that they were safe to send along to our customers. At this point, we really started engaging more with our worldwide supply chain partners. All the way from Penang, Malaysia, I have Hock Seng here to tell you more about that.
Thank you, Ethan. So you have seen what Jason and Ethan has shared in terms of what we prepared and also in terms of how we responded when the disaster happened. So I will share the third part of the story. But before that, I think it's amazing how much resilience and personal commitment our team in Santa Rosa has when, despite the personal challenges they have, we are able to contribute to their business goals. So let me run through a summary of that. So essentially, what I'm sharing is on the business process that's happening in parallel while the site is being recovered. And we split that into 5 key steps. I will run through more on each of them. So firstly, when something like that happens, the important part is trying to reach out to our customer. That's the important part as a customer-first company, right? So we need to know and assure our customer that we are able to deliver, we can deliver, and work with the customer in terms of what would be the projected date that we could give to them, and understand what are the escalations, the priorities. And at the same time, like what Jason and Ethan has shared, we are doing the recovery at the tech center and looking into what are potential damages, when the factory can be up, and what are the inventory status that we have. And fortunately, there's very minimal impact in terms of the inventory, and when that would recover in terms of a projection. And finally, we look at the rest of the supply chain in terms of where are the supply chain built in terms of contract manufacturers, in terms of instruments, and where else that's potentially being impacted. So with all that information, we actually integrate that into a total view by putting in that information into RapidResponse. So from the information from the customer, the information on the recovery from tech center, and the rest of the supply chain. And during that time, as Ethan has shared, each factory can be brought up at a different time. And each process area has its different timeline. And that's where the power of RapidResponse comes in, when we're able to simulate the changes on the go. As we know the information, we make new views of the information. And that, what we needed was the vertical visibility that ties across from down all the way down to the lowest part of the supply chain, the what-if capabilities, and also the supply chain detail analytics in terms of the priorities. So next, when we have all that information, we're able to get what is happening and able to simulate different strategies. So we brought that into a few scenarios. So this is essentially what Kinaxis shared as a vision this morning, right? So we actually lived that. So from a best case, most likely, worst case, what are the possibilities of the impact? And with that, we understood what are the products impacted, what are the potential risks to our revenue and which customer is impacted. And that actually helps us a lot in terms of prioritizing which supply that's very limited at that point to go to which customer. So with that, we are able to look into the priorities and ensure that the top tier priorities that is already firm is actually allocated with the right supply that's already fixed, such as the available on the hand, the jobs on the line, and the rest of the forecasted supply and others like safety stock and so on has to be pushed to the side. So with that, it sounds simple, right? Just putting in the numbers and getting out a result. But to put it in context, our supply chain is very deep. It cuts and crisscrosses across multiple sites, multiple companies. And just to put it in perspective, how complicated that simulation or assessment is about 11,000 components, more than 15 level of BOM, more than 600,000 items, unique item plan, and cutting across 10 different sites. And that results in more than 1,500 models. That is not including the configuration, that permutation of that. So with that, we actually created an integrated and aligned view of the supply chain, although the data doesn't reside in our company as a total view. So finally, with all that information, we need to bring that into the execution to the planners, to the buyers, to the manufacturing floor, and align all the activities across the whole supply chain. And to do that, we actually had an internal Center of Excellence team and engaged an external partners, which is Prana, to look at what are the pegging, what are the priorities, and develop some unique workbooks to cater for this situation. Okay, then this process is actually scalable. We have done variation of this in previous events, such as during the Tianjin port explosion, the Kumamoto earthquake, and of course the most recent is the Santa Rosa fire. So with that, what do we get as outcome, right? It's a faster assessment. We could do that in a matter of 1 or 2 hours, despite all the complexity that we talk about. We can, with the information, we can actually take action faster. And this 2 point actually ties very well with the tagline from Kinaxis, which is, no sooner, act faster, right? And with that, we have a very high customer satisfaction. For our tracking, actually there was 0 cancellation from our customer. And we are able to work very well with them in terms of giving the right dates at the right time that still meets the customer needs despite that fire. And as testament of that, what is the result to Keysight? So we actually achieved the highest ever revenue growth for Keysight despite the fire. And that is a testament that the people, the enabler, and the process is working well. And it is giving us the right result. And we are poised to go even further and able to sustain that because in Q3 it's even higher. Okay, with that, I'm passing back to Jason to summarize the journey that we have gone through.
Thank you, Hock. So in retrospect, I want to pass along some key learnings from this journey. People first, right? That permeated all the way through the experience. Relationships matter, right? It's not about the electronic data interchange, it's the relationships we built. We opened up the makerspace the day of the fire. 2, command centers, and those will float into functional command centers, which allows the experts to be the experts. Give them the support they need. We were sitting in an RV in the back of the parking lot with our senior vice president and our vice president, and their question was, what do you need? We're going to need help building out workbooks. We immediately brought in Prana Consulting to aid in that, and we still use some of those learnings today. And finally, all hands in. It's a core value to support our people and our operations. It permeates through our work, and we were moving people to where the constraints were during the recovery. I had a gentleman who used to own a computer store. He was setting up computers. Imagine you go to work, the next day it's not there, and you have no computers. So we brought in hundreds of new computers. So to close on that, we would like to say thank you for the opportunity. And to close on my personal journey, I'm getting trusses delivered today. We're rebuilding. Unfortunately, my contractor isn't up on RapidResponse yet, so I don't know if they've arrived, but he assures me they're going to be there today. Thank you.